Hey everyone, this is Craig Lennon, and I'm excited to be a part of Humans of Telecom.
Hey everyone, a very warm welcome to Humans of Telecom, the Unplugged podcast. This is your host, Anurag Aggarwal. As you all know, this is where we look beyond balance sheets and technology headlines to discover the people behind the progress, their roots, their defining choices, and the human stories that fuel innovation in telecom. And today's guest brings a journey that is as fascinating as it is inspiring. From his early beginnings on the east coast of the US, surrounded by giants like Bell Labs, Verizon, and AT&T, he found his way into telecom through Lucent Technologies, learned the ropes at competitive carriers, and sharpened his perspective at Vonage. Along the way, he played a key role in shaping how phone numbers are administered in the US, an achievement that reflects his belief in challenging the status quo and creating the future you want to live in. For more than a decade now, he has been with a specific brand and leads a team within that our industry is always talking about. And that's none other than Google. At Google, this gentleman is leading telecom infrastructure partnerships in voice and messaging, where his work touches billions of users worldwide. Beyond the boardrooms, he's a sports enthusiast, a golfer, and someone who believes deeply in service as a parent, a teammate, and a leader. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Craig Lennon, Global Partnerships Lead at Google. Craig, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this journey. We'd love to hear more about you. Which part of the world do you belong to? And from where are you joining this podcast today?
Thanks for having me, Anurag. I really appreciate the invite. So, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, originally, but I grew up on the coast of New Jersey. While I'm joining the call today from London while I'm on business travel, where I normally would be joining from is Silicon Valley, California, where I live with my wife and 2 children. I moved there in about 2014, at the same time that I joined Google, as you mentioned.
So, Craig, firstly, once again, thank you so much. I know that you're always jet setting across the globe, and thank you for finding time for this conversation. And can I call you Mr. Google? Because you're the guy to whom the entire industry comes to, and sometimes not even directly to you, but to your entire team. I think many people in the industry would not even know who Craig Lennon is because there is a strong team which you created in front of you who's leading the charge. And I know that having worked in multiple companies myself, how we all are always running behind Google and looking to get whatever bits of traffic we can. So how does being in that hot seat feel for you?
I'm blessed. I think it's a very privileged position that I'm in, and I don't take that privilege lightly. As you mentioned, I've also had the privilege of being able to surround myself and work with and for some really talented folks at Google, and it makes doing what you described much easier. So I definitely feel blessed. I get to participate in a lot of interesting aspects of the ecosystem and the industry, and have an impact well beyond what I would be able to do individually. So I really do feel fortunate to be in the position that I'm in.
Amazing. And I think you very rightly said that you don't take it for granted. I think that's something which shows your humility and character, because being in that position and being on the originating side of so much of revenue, which this industry thrives on, I can imagine that this position can sometimes lead to a feeling of a position of power, but it's great to see your thoughts and your attitude towards it. And that is something which, Craig, I've observed in all my interactions with you. You know, there is always a sense of humility and there is a sense of simplicity, both in your team and in yourself. And I think that's something which is a hallmark of every Googler I've interacted with in my career so far.
Well, that's very kind of you.
And now let's start by hearing a little bit more about your journey. So, Craig, while I did briefly touch upon some aspects in the introduction, but let's hear it from the horse's mouth. How did you get into the world of telecom? Was it by accident? Was it planned? And how has your journey been so far all the way up till Google?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and the TLDR on that is it's probably more by accident. But let me start with, I graduated college. I went to college in Fairfield, Connecticut, and I continued living down the Jersey Shore. And telecom, as you mentioned, was really big. It was a very big industry in New Jersey at the time. Both AT&T, Verizon were headquartered there. Bell Labs was 15 miles from where I grew up. And we had a family friend who ran an infrastructure sales team for Lucent Technologies and offered me a job, my first job out of college. So that's how I got into telecom. I worked in the old Bell Labs building there in Homedale. And after working a few years at Lucent, I began working for one of our customers. There was a lot of small competitive carriers at the time, kind of a result of the Telecom Act. And the one I started with was Broadview Networks. They were based in Long Island City, Queens. And it's really there that I learned a lot. I worked there about a decade, and I learned a whole lot about telecom. I worked in product management, in finance, and running their wholesale business. And working across the business in that way, I learned really a lot about just the way the telco networks operate, what makes them profitable, and then how to partner with other companies to grow the business. One of those businesses that was a customer of ours was Vonage, and so my next step in my journey was to go work for Vonage. And I'll talk more a little bit later in our discussion about some of the work there. But then subsequently, 3 years later, I took a role at Google. Google was similarly investing in its own infrastructure and connectivity for voice and messaging services. And I joined them in about late 2013 and really been running that team ever since at Google.
Wonderful. So I guess you're right that this was not something that you had actually planned, but through a mix of your family friend actually running a sales team at Lucent, I think that chance encounter is what brought you into the journey. And how's journey been in Google? I mean, while of course I mentioned about the fact that so much of our industry runs on Google traffic, but when you look at it from an inside out perspective, how is it like being a part of the Google family for over a decade now?
Yeah, it's really been an interesting journey within Google. I mean, when I joined Google, it was a much smaller company, and as I mentioned, they were really a novice when it came to the telecom infrastructure investments that they were making. They knew they needed this type of connectivity, but they didn't have a lot of the in-house subject matter expertise. There was a lot of initiatives that we know Google for today that didn't exist at that time, and so really it was almost a startup mentality when I first joined Google. And it's matured a lot, along the last 10 years. But those early days were really, we were bootstrapping kind of the way Google approached this space. And I've seen that evolve over the last 10 years. So it's been a very interesting journey to kind of help be the formative, primitive team within Google to establish a lot of the relationships and a lot of the approaches that we have to voice messaging connectivity, and to see where it's at now is not only rewarding, like to see the end results, but it's also been a very interesting journey while I've been doing that at Google.
Wonderful. And within this entire journey of yours, is there any one memorable or impactful moment in your career that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so I think I consider this very formative for me. As I mentioned, while I was at Vonage, we did a lot of work to change the way phone numbers are administered in the US, specifically voice over IP companies trying to get direct access through the FCC to these numbers and then manage that as part of their business. And it really took a cross-functional team approach to doing that. We needed engineering and legal, regulatory, finance, operations. All these different groups needed to come together in this effort. And so it was really informative on how to work cross-functionally as a team. I learned a lot through that. But the bigger thing was that it was a bold move, and it really did demonstrate thinking differently, trying to be disruptive, and having the confidence in the vision and the outcome, to take it on. And the phrase I always like to say that this embodies is the old Steve Jobs quote that says, "The people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do." And I know this isn't world-changing type of development in telecom, but in my small sphere, it was something that you had to squint to see if it was possible, and it wasn't a certain outcome, but through perseverance and through teamwork and just ambition to get the outcome that we wanted, we did change the way the industry works, all the way up through the way the U.S. regulator regulates phone numbers in the U.S. So So it was really formative to me to teach me that all things are possible, and it really just you got to have the conviction in what you're trying to do, and you can actually get there. So it gave me that belief to break through the glass ceiling of kind of the own limitations that you would put on yourself. So that was to me very informative into the rest of my career.
Amazing. I think the quote which you shared about Steve Jobs, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. I think that's so apt. And ironically, today we are witnessing in the messaging industry also that
Hmm.
Google is changing the way it authenticates. And
Yeah.
that's created quite a bit of trouble, I'll say, for the industry. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's in along the same vein, right? It's as we sit here today, it would be very hard to picture what that type of authentication could look like years from now. But what I will tell you, my experience at Google has taught me this, as well as the previous experience I mentioned at Vonage, is that looking back, you do see that we did make some of those changes. Things like the RCS initiative at Google. Like looking back on it now, it seems like, oh, it was obvious that it would get here. But I can tell you, I remember being a part of that when we had less than 1 million users using RCS, right? So it is something that while we sit here today, it seems very daunting, but experience tells us we will get to the other side of it, and we can build the world that we want to live in that way.
Absolutely. And you're very right. I think the RCS initiative also, ever since I joined the industry, I remember how it's been an uphill task to keep the momentum alive and keep it within the attention span of the industry. And I think now eventually we see the inflection point come through and the adoption increase. But we're not here to talk about work. I keep digressing myself because it's such an exciting brand that you're associated with. But let's get back more on the people side of things. And before we jump more into Craig, one more question about you and your team. So, you are the prominent leader of one of the biggest brands, if not the biggest brand in the world. What are some of the high points and challenges you see in leading a globally diverse team? I've seen that your team is not only based in the Americas, but it's based in Asia, it's based in Europe. I don't know if you have people in Africa also, or even in Australia for that matter. But yes, I do know that you have a fairly diverse and a widespread team. So, how is that entire experience been for you?
Yeah, so it offers both high points and challenges. I think the high points are fairly obvious, right? The one of the great benefits of working with the team that I have and at Google is the ability to make a difference, right? We can have impact at scale. We touch so many users and can make a difference in a lot of people's lives. So like to me, the high point is fairly obvious. If that's what you're interested in, Google's a great place for you. The challenges, though, are not unlike those that I'm sure a lot of people experience, right? One would be just having a small global team to operate across time zones. I've always found that to be very difficult, right? One of the reasons I'm here today in Europe is just another tactic in trying to mitigate that. And really, I haven't found a magic bullet to solving that time zone challenge. So I just apply as many tactics as I can to try and just keep the team close and working together. But that's obviously always been a challenge. The other one that I think most people probably don't consider, but I found it to be true over the last 10 years at Google is Google has the challenge of being able to do so many things with the resources and infrastructure and capabilities that Google has that I don't think people realize how often we say no to things that would otherwise be interesting opportunities. The things that we do invest in have to have significant scale and impact. And simply because we can do a thing doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for us to devote time and resource at. So I found that to be a very unique, interesting challenge here at Google is the discipline we have to say no to things that would otherwise be interesting and impactful at a certain scale, but they're just not the focus of what we're trying to do. So I thought those were kind of interesting challenges that the team comes across and we've dealt with over the last several years.
Absolutely. As they say that if you say yes to something unwanted, effectively you are saying no to something else that you actually require. So I think the
That's
courage
right.
and the ability to choose what you say no to is as important as what you are saying yes to. Absolutely.
Right.
And now let's shift gears, Craig. Enough about Google. Now we are just going to talk about Craig, Lennon, the human. So, shifting to the human side of the conversation, Craig, as I said before, that many know you and many don't even know about you. But if there is something surprising or shocking that most people around you, even your team maybe doesn't know, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, it's funny. I thought a bit about this. I'm really not that exciting a person, but hopefully folks find some of this interesting. I think one thing that folks don't probably know about me is that when I was born very early, and I was a what they call a preemie baby, and I was in the neonatal intensive care unit in Brooklyn back when that was a very new thing, and for the first few months, that's where I lived. I lived in the NICU, and it's funny because my mother used to always attribute a lot of my personality, the fight I have and the grit I have to that early, kind of stay in intensive care, kind of fighting from the very first day to be around. She used to kind of use that as a analogy for just how my personality is to this day. But I don't think a lot of people know that. I don't talk a lot about that. And what's kind of even more interesting is my wife. I met her. She was managing the NICU at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York. So it's kind of been a funny little touchstone in my life that so many the neonatal intensive care unit was where I was first housed, and it's been a big part of my wife's career journey as well.
Interesting. That's definitely something which I'm hoping many people in your team also won't be aware of. So I think
Yeah.
this is something which I hope that many people who listen to this episode, they might just come up to you and strike a conversation on that note.
Yeah, it's funny. You can sometimes get surprised where things like that, more people than you know either have a child or themselves were in it, and it never comes up, so people don't know. But it's funny when it does. You'd be surprised in a group of 10 people, you might find two or three people have had that kind of experience as well.
Absolutely. And Craig, beyond work, I know as you mentioned about juggling time zones and travel and all the deadlines, but how does Craig recharge himself? What are your passions and hobbies that help you unwind?
Yeah, so I'm a big sports lover. I've always been a sports lover. I played sports including soccer at a pretty high level in college. And so, sports is a big part of my life. So it shouldn't be surprising to anyone who knows me that one of the big ways that I unwind and recharge is golf. Golf is really the sport that still is available to me. As I mentioned, I played a lot of sports, but as I get older, it's harder to do that. But I've picked up golf over the years, and I really have a passion for it now. I just find that it's a great mix for all kinds of things. Like, it allows me to travel and see very interesting places and courses. It keeps me outdoors. I have a lot of great friendships and relationships that I've developed through golfing with friends. But almost most importantly is, as I mentioned, it still provides that kind of competitive outlet for me. Like, I just love to compete. That's why I've always been interested in sports, and golf still allows me to do that, even if my talents as an athlete are declining. Golf is a great way for me to kind of tap into that still, and enjoy all the other aspects of the game.
Interesting. Yes. I personally never had a chance to play this amazing sport, but whoever has, I've seen how addictive it is for people. And I've seen how people hold their golf time as very close to their heart. And that's like their sacred space and the sacred time which nobody can meddle with. So I can totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and the move to California has obviously poured gasoline kind of on that passion. California is a great place for that as an activity. The weather, the just some of the courses and the opportunities to play. So I think that it's also had a key role in developing the passion I have.
Awesome. That's good to know, Craig. And Craig, now we move to a very interesting question. So, two truths and a lie. You need to share three interesting statements with us about yourself. And I'm hoping they're all extremely interesting and shocking. And I have to guess which one of them is a lie. So, do you have three such statements for us today?
I do. I do. Hopefully none of them are shocking, but I did want to see if I could fool you on this.
Okay.
So my three statements are: I have run a marathon.
Hmm.
I have won an eighth grade breakdancing competition,
Okay.
and I have won a math competition representing my school. Which one of those is a lie?
You seem very fond of your school period, it seems. All right. And that I'm hoping that's a while ago, so that'll make it difficult for me to compare today's Craig with the Craig back from school days. But let's see. Running a marathon. Craig, whenever I've met you, I've always found you to be extremely fit and active. I would like to believe that that's a truth. Break dancing. I am going to say that for the sake of this conversation and this question, and I hope it is true. So I'm going to presume that that's also the truth. So you have won in eighth grade a breakdancing competition. And while I'm sure you're a genius with numbers and you might have won a math competition as well, but again, just for the interest of this question, I'm going to presume that the first two are true and the third one is a lie. So am I right out here?
You are not. The lie is that I've won an eighth grade breakdancing competition.
Oh,
Anurag, I am a terrible dancer, and I would not subject anyone, including impressionable eighth graders, to my dancing abilities. So that is my lie.
well, I was hoping somewhere that maybe that's the truth and we would have heard a story around it and how you went about it. But if you would have had some pictures or something to share with us from that competition, it would have been an interesting one to talk about.
It is true that when I was in eighth grade, breakdancing was that would have been the form of dancing competition. So I may be dating myself there, but I would not have been so bold as to compete.
Very well. We take you on that. And you have run a marathon. How has that experience been? Is it like been a one-time thing for you or do you regularly run?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It was exactly that. It was a one-time thing. When I first met my wife, she was a big runner, and she had run a couple marathons, and so I joined her. We ran the New York City Marathon. Gosh, I don't even remember the year, but and she beat me, which I think she'll be very happy to hear me admit. um, and she's run many more since. She's run the Boston Marathon. So I participated the one time. I was very proud. I ran it in under four hours, and so I did a great job. But I still am number two in my family when it comes to marathon time. So
Amazing. All right. And on that note, the last question of this section, Craig, if there is one thing about your life that you could possibly change, what would that one thing be?
yeah, so it's in a little bit of soul searching on this question. The way I feel is that I've always been fairly conservative growing up, and I've gone to good schools and I've made a lot of choices that always were kind of like made sense. But as I get older, what I'm kind of reflecting back on is that I think the one thing I would change is I may have been more apt to take more chances when I was younger, right? Try more things. And because I think what I've come to learn as I've gotten older is that even in failing when taking those chances, the amount of learning that you take away is so valuable as you grow. And that like really by not taking those chances earlier, you're depriving yourself maybe not just the opportunity for the success of taking those chances, but also the learnings that taking those chances and failing offer you. So I think anyone who's, at the start of their career or, early on in their development is to take more chances. The earlier the better. The risk reward when you're younger is so much better. And again, the learnings that you get will be so valuable. So to me, as I look back, is there's no one like regret. It's really more of a like I wish it didn't take me so long to learn the lessons of what taking more chances really can deliver for you.
Absolutely. I think that's such a fair point because I think not taking chances or not taking a risk, especially early in your life, is also a risk of its own.
Right.
So I think to that extent, I can totally resonate with that. And one more point in this section. So, Craig, while we've got so many thoughts from you, and it's not every day that people get a chance to interact with you. So, if there is a message or a thought that you'd like to leave with our listeners, what would that be?
So maybe along the same lines, there's maybe 2 points that I would highlight. One is again along the same thinking of take chances is learn to bet on yourself, right? I often talk to folks who are talking about taking a role or a new job or some some project, and they're a little worried that they're not fully prepared for it or it's not the right time. And I think both of those or any of that kind of thinking really can deprive you. So really, bet on yourself. Don't wait for the perfect time to do it, because there may never be one. And even the phrase I've heard uttered is fake it till you make it, right? There is totally an aspect of, really betting on yourself that you can do it even if you don't think you're ready. Get involved and get ready as you go. And then the other message that I would say is, and you touched on it very early in our conversation, is that none of what I've been able to do and none of anything worthwhile is done without a team, right? I think it's important to, do things as a team, learn how to be an effective team member, whether that's a team lead or even just a contributor. The analogy I give to folks is I've played on sports teams where maybe I was the best player on the team, but I've also played on sports teams where I was clearly not the best player. And I've learned a lot from both of those roles. And so I just think learning how to be a good teammate is so important in all aspects of life. That's a skill that I think doesn't get talked about enough. But certainly anything we do here at Google, we do as a team. Anything I do in my personal life, we do as a team or a family, right? So I think that's a big message I would say to folks is it's very important to be a great individual, but it's also really important to know how to be a good part of a team.
Absolutely. There is a quote which I always go by. It says that if you want to walk fast, you walk alone. But if you want to walk far, you walk along with everyone. So I think the importance of a team can never be undermined. I think that's what makes a winning company outshine over another. So totally get that.
Right.
All right, Craig. And well, we're having a wonderfully interesting conversation, but we are down to our final section, our sign off section. So, our signature question to you: what does being human mean to you? What sort of a human being would you want the world to remember you as?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And I thought quite a bit about it. And I came to a few conclusions, but really all of them kind of center around a single word. And that word is service, right? Some folks in my career and my upbringing have kind of, said this in many different ways, but essentially like a life spent in service is what it means to be most human. And it may surprise others, but it's also what I feel is most rewarding, right? There's a lot of things that you can do that provide all types of rewards, right? Whether it's a monetary reward or recognition or things of that nature. But I think what a lot of folks, when they think about it, will agree is that some of the most personally rewarding experiences you have are things where you're living in service of others, right? And what does that mean? Well, it can be directly in service of others, things like volunteering and charity, and those are the obvious, right? But as I was saying before, just being in service to your family or your team in achieving a goal, or just even through allyship to folks who need that. I think what you would find is not only is it human, it's also one of the most rewarding ways to express yourself. And I have to give a little credit to a colleague in the ecosystem that I work with, David Morgan at Bandwidth, who I've had this conversation with himself, and this is a strong belief he has. And he's been able to share that with me, and I fully subscribe to it. And I couldn't agree more that as I reflect on the things that I've been able to do, what I often find most rewarding is where I've actually been able to be in service to others. And again, whether that's a family, a company, a spouse, or a team, those are the things that I end up in the quiet moments where I feel most rewarded and most human, because to me, that's what it means to be human.
Fair enough, Craig. I think that's a wonderful thought to end the conversation on: living in service to others. I think there are so many fantastic things you mentioned about your journey so far, and I'm sure those who interacted with you will agree that you are living a life which resonates with these thoughts. So, some wonderful thoughts here by Craig Lennon. And Craig, thank you so much for your time once again. As I said, that I know that you're moving around the globe, jet setting all the time, but still we've managed to find time for this amazing conversation. I love your candid way of approaching every question and putting it across in a very simple manner. So thank you so much. And I do hope at the right time we get to catch up as well.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Anurag. I really appreciate the invite. As I said, I think I love listening to this podcast. I learned so much about a lot of the colleagues and folks I see in the ecosystem and the industry. And I just think it's such a valuable thing that you're doing. So I really love the invite and I appreciate contributing.
Thanks a lot, Craig. Thanks a lot once again. And as always, to our wonderful listeners here, thanks a lot for tuning into the show. We hope this episode gave you a good glimpse of the human side of Craig Lennon. From being born 2 months early and fighting his way through the NICU to building a career that spans Lucent, Vonage, and now Google, his journey is one of grit and growth. A proud New Yorker at heart who grew up on the Jersey Shore and now calls Silicon Valley as his home, where he lives with his wife and his children. A lifelong sports lover who once played competitive soccer and today finds his recharge on the golf course, outdoors, competitive, and building connections along the way. Someone with surprising feats, a marathon runner, and a school math competition winner. And finally, someone who at his core is a believer in service, building teams, empowering others, and leaving a lasting impact on both technology and people. That for us is Craig Lennon. So, if you enjoyed today's episode, do stay tuned in because we shall soon be releasing yet another episode and another compelling story from the telecom space. And do follow the podcast on your preferred streaming channel. On behalf of Humans of Telecom, this is your host Anurag Aggarwal signing off for now. Take care.